It's 2 days after Christmas, 2008. It's an absolutely beautiful morning. The ground's really frozen hard. It's cold, but clear and bright. It's fantastic here by the canal. And Christmas was pretty good, really. I had quite a nice Christmas with my family. And I got the presents I wanted, which is great. My wife bought me a Black & Decker workbench, which is great. I wanted that. One of my kids bought me a DVD of The Great Escape, which is my favourite film. And I watched that 2 nights ago, which was great. And my other lad, John, got me a really nice fountain pen, which I also wanted. So that was great. What I didn't get, which I don't suppose anybody got for Christmas this year, is an fMRI machine. I'm really looking forward to the time when fMRI machines are portable and cheap. I'm sure the time will come, but it's not yet, clearly. Because there's lots of things I'd really like to try out in an fMRI machine. And the one I've been thinking about this morning is to do with how we frame things as art. And I'm reminded of that, well, for all sorts of reasons. But one of the reasons is I used to work in a university which had quite a thriving visual art department. And one of the tutors would go around and have a look at the students' work in their workspaces and give a critic of what kind of work they were doing. And on one occasion, this particular tutor went to a student's workspace when they weren't there and looked at this particular piece of work and wrote various things about it and left it for the student. And it turned out that this particular piece of work was actually a lampshade that the student had bought and just left in her workspace prior to taking it home. Which is a bit odd, really. But of course there's lots of jokes associated with that to do with contemporary art. I'm not going to go there, really. But what I was interested in that incident, and more generally, is what happens when we frame an experience or an object as within a category of art, and what happens when it comes out of that category, it drops into that category. The lampshade in this particular incident I mentioned was for the tutor framed as an art piece. And that framing, of course, produces all the effects. But the fact that it was framed in that way means there must have been something happening in the tutor, in that person, which made them think that. It must have been instantiated somehow in their mind in that way. And given that mind is supervenient on the physical brain, there must be something physical in the brain happening at that moment, which allowed that framing, that categorization of this lampshade as art to take place. And then presumably when it was revealed that it wasn't an art object, something else happened which removed that instantiation or did something to that neural instantiation to make it different. The most dramatic experience I've had like that, actually, was a few years back now. It's when I was introduced to an artist from Eastern Europe called Darko Maver, I think he was pronounced. And he was like Serbian or Croatian, something like that, this particular artist. And his work consisted of installations in hotel rooms or installations in public spaces, which contained fiberglass models, photorealistic fiberglass models of human figures who had been through some kind of violent process. They'd been subject to torture, or they'd been killed in particularly unpleasant ways, that kind of thing. So he'd make these objects, these installations, these environments, and then usually photograph them, document them. And the documentation would be displayed in galleries or spaces. And you would look at the documentation of these events. And it was, it was pretty difficult stuff to look at, pretty uncompromising images. But at the same time, there was something about those images which placed them within an art historical context. Photorealistic fiberglass figures looked a little bit like some of Dwayne Hanson's sculptures, or a little bit like the kind of thing that what are they called? The Chapman brothers do that kind of thing. So it's in, or maybe going back further, something like Goya's photorealistic etchings of disasters of war, that kind of thing. So it's in a kind of tradition of difficult to look at photorealistic images, and that. So it was. I think Darko Maver got a little bit of acclaim. There were certainly a couple of journal articles about his work, and I actually talked about his work to students once or twice and looked at it myself. It was, as I say, difficult, but I managed it. The kicker in all that was that it transpired a few months later. And there was a whole backstory about Darko Maver being arrested by the authorities and this, that and the other. But the kicker in it, as I say, was a few months later, it was revealed that Darko Maver didn't actually exist at all. He was a fictional artist invented by a European arts organisation called something like 001, a string of zeros and ones anyway. And they just invented this character, invented his backstory, invented his biography, invented his artworks, and so on, and managed to get some exhibitions in his name and some stories written about him as a kind of situationist prank, I suppose. But where it really kicks you in the teeth, that thing, is that you realise at that point that the images that you've looked at, the images that were displayed in documentary form in these exhibitions, weren't photorealistic finely glass models of humans at all. They were authentic documentations of actual atrocities. Some of them during the troubles in the former Yugoslavia about 15 years ago. But other images as well, I think. And certainly when I sort of found out about that, and even now actually when I look back on it, you can just, this huge wave of kind of horror, I guess, just comes over you. That the images that you've looked at, the images that you've placed in one sort of art historical context, don't belong there at all. They belong to a history of warfare and a history of torture, history of atrocity, and that really impacts itself as a physical feeling. I can certainly feel it's just a wave of, not exactly nausea, but just horror and shock at that point, at that kind of realization. And given that those feelings must again be instantiated within cognition, within the physical structure of the brain, if you like, as well, there is that supervenient relationship I mentioned before, then again something must be happening in my brain when that change takes place. Whatever the neural instantiation of that of that framing of Darko Maver's work as art, when that changes to its recontextualization as atrocity documentation, it seems to be going to a very different part of my brain, and that part of my brain is provoking, its placement in that part of my brain is provoking all kinds of very visceral responses. So I suppose the reason why I go back to wanting an fMRI scanner for Christmas is I'd be really curious to know what's happening there exactly. What new neurons are firing, or what suppressing neurons have stopped firing. And was something happening in my brain there prior to this realization that was keeping the horror at bay, keeping it in a safe place? Or has something else happened? Has this new realization provoked a way of looking at this which associates with very different things in my mind and brings all the responses to do with fight or flight? It's something else going on there. So I suppose I'd like just to know which parts of the brain are being activated before and after that change of realization, and what other things tend to happen in those areas of the brain. Is one area associated with safety and one with danger, if I can put it really crudely? What's going on there? I'd be curious to know. I think it'd tell us something about how art functions, really. I can't look at Darko Maver's work now. I haven't looked at it for about 8 years.